My name is Sarah Albright, and at 32, I was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar technology company, Zenith Nexus Dynamics. But before I became that Sarah, the one signing off on mergers and acquisitions, I was just the other child in the Albright family, perpetually standing in the shadow of my younger brother, Liam. The moment that broke me, the moment I decided I was finally done chasing a ghost, happened around Christmas. My father, Robert, called me personally, which was rare enough to make me step out of a crucial board meeting. His voice was stiff, hesitant. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk about the Christmas party this year. Liam is bringing his new girlfriend, Emily. She's a director at a big finance firm. We think it might be better if you came for New Year's Day instead." I remember the silence on the line, colder than the Chicago winter outside my floor-to-ceiling office window. He was uninviting me, his own daughter, from Christmas because my success, which they barely understood, might somehow overshadow Liam's girlfriend's director title. The raw, cutting unfairness of it finally snapped something inside me, a fragile thread of hope I hadn't even realized I was still clutching. This wasn't just a slight. It was the entire toxic history of our family condensed into one final, excruciating sentence. To truly understand that punch to the gut, you have to go back to the beginning. Growing up in the North Shore suburbs of Chicago, our family looked like the American dream on the outside. But inside our quiet, tidy home, the dynamic was anything but balanced. Liam, for years my junior, was the golden child. He didn't have to achieve anything spectacular. His very existence was celebrated. I, the elder sister, was defined by expectation. I can still picture the contrast. When Liam brought home a C+ on a geometry test, my mother, Eleanor, would bake his favorite chocolate chip cookies. "He worked so hard for that C," she'd beam. When I brought home straight A's and a perfect score in advanced placement calculus, the response was always the same mechanical nod from my father. "That's what we expect from you, Sarah. You're so independent." Independence, in my family's lexicon, was a synonym for doesn't need us and, more importantly, doesn't deserve our time. The disparity extended far beyond academics. My parents never missed a single one of Liam's Little League games, even when he spent the entire season warming the bench on a perennial losing team. The devotion was absolute. But when I, as a junior in high school, qualified for the National Debate Championship in Boston, a massive, prestigious event, my father suddenly had an unmovable work commitment, and my mother claimed an instantaneous, crippling migraine. I took the bus across state lines alone, won the state-level title, and came home to find them glued to the couch, cheering Liam on as he played a video game. "Your brother needs the encouragement more than you do, Sarah," Dad said, not looking up. "You're already so driven." The crowning insult, the moment the message became loud and undeniable, was graduation day. Liam, coasting through with a 2.8 GPA, received a shiny, brand-new Ford Mustang GT. A deep cherry red, his dream car, paid for in full. My graduation, 3 years prior, where I had stood on stage as the valedictorian, was marked by a small ceremony and a gift that, in retrospect, was brutally symbolic, a high-quality, monogrammed luggage set. "For your journey ahead," my mother had said, that strained, false smile plastered across her face. The message was clear. Liam was the centerpiece, meant to stay, nurtured and supported. I was meant to pack up my belongings and go. This chronic emotional starvation created a void no achievement could fill. I tried everything to earn their interest, volunteering leadership roles, even mastering my father's complicated barbecue recipe. But nothing altered the gravitational pull toward Liam. That constant need to prove myself against an impossible standard forged a resilience I wouldn't trade for anything. By 18, I was managing my own schedule, budgeting my babysitting money for dates and essentials, and mentally preparing for my escape. When the acceptance letters arrived from Northwestern, Stanford, and Columbia, 3 partial scholarships among them, my parents seemed more burdened than proud. "Don't expect us to fund some fancy private school," my father warned, never mentioning the generous college fund they had already established for Liam, who was still struggling to pass high school algebra. I left for Northwestern University with 2 duffel bags, a single box of books, and the sheer grit earned from years of neglect. My parents' final words to me as they dropped me off at the dorm? "Don't forget to call your brother, Sarah. He's really going to miss you." They were back in the car before the trunk lid had even slammed shut. It was in that moment, standing alone in a tiny cinder-block room, that I made a vow. My worth would never again be determined by their selective sight. I was going to build a life so successful, so undeniably powerful, that their opinion would become utterly irrelevant. This freedom, paid for with years of hurt, was the foundation of the empire they had no idea I was quietly constructing. I was finally free to be myself, the self they never bothered to see. The college years were less of a traditional coming-of-age story and more of a brutal, beautiful forge. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, contributed the grand total of $0 to my Northwestern tuition and living expenses. "We're busy saving for Liam's future," my mother stated plainly during a particularly short phone call my freshman year. "You're doing so well, Sarah. You seem to have it handled." This was the ultimate irony. The very resilience they had forced upon me was now their justification for abandoning me financially. But freedom, even when expensive, was intoxicating. Without the suffocating presence of their unequal dynamic, I finally flourished. In the lecture halls and study groups, I wasn't Liam's older sister or the one who needs less. I was Sarah, the sharpest mind in the room. I doubled down, pursuing business administration and computer science, 2 majors chosen not out of pure passion, but strategic necessity. I needed high earning potential, and I needed it fast so I could pay off my own future, brick by painful brick. To fund my education and living costs, I became a ghost on campus, juggling 3 demanding part-time jobs simultaneously. My day started before dawn with the 4 a.m. shift at the campus coffee shop, followed by classes, and then administrative work at a downtown firm on weekends. My late nights were spent tutoring wealthy students in the very calculus I had taught myself from library books. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and caffeine, perpetually exhausted, perpetually hungry for ramen noodles. But the work never broke me. It made me sharp. It made me ruthless about time management. It taught me the true value of a dollar earned through sheer grit. While my peers worried about their next party, I worried about the next student loan payment. That $40,000 in student loan debt became my personal accountability partner, a constant reminder that every success was mine and mine alone, entirely divorced from the Albright name. I graduated summa cum laude. I stood on the stage, delivering a commencement speech that felt incredibly hollow, knowing that only 2 faces in the audience who mattered were checking their watches. My parents left immediately after the ceremony, not for a family dinner, but to drive back home for Liam's summer baseball league game. The irony was palpable. They prioritized a casual summer game over the highest academic honor of my life. When I tried to share the news of my job offer at Apex Innovation Technologies, my father simply looked at his phone, already mentally clocked out. "Try to find a nice young man with good prospects, dear," my mother offered, instead of congratulations. Apex Innovation was merely a foot in the door of the tech industry, paying barely enough to cover my rent and the first terrifying monthly student loan payment. But I attacked that job like a starving person at a feast. I was the first one in, the last one out. I volunteered for the impossible projects, the ones my colleagues labeled career killers. While others saw workload, I saw opportunity. I didn't work 40-hour weeks. I worked 80-hour weeks. My diligence paid off 18 months later when I identified a critical bottleneck in the company's production pipeline. The innovative solution I developed saved Apex millions annually. It was this achievement, not my grades or my family name, that earned me my first promotion to team lead at 25. The modest salary bump finally meant I could afford groceries that didn't come packaged in styrofoam cups. But the emotional dynamic with my parents remained a sterile, unchanging landscape. Computers, my father would sigh dismissively during our obligatory monthly calls. I still don't understand why you didn't go into something stable like teaching. They simply couldn't comprehend that I was now earning more than both of them combined. My mother's only real concern was whether my demanding schedule was driving away potential husbands. Meanwhile, Liam, the golden child, had dropped out of community college after 3 semesters, having achieved no discernible focus. My parents framed this failure as taking time to find his passion. They allowed him to move back home rent-free, where he cycled through a series of dead-end jobs: retail, food delivery, cell phone sales, each lasting only a few months before he was fired for lateness or simply quit. Their response? Researching scholarships for him. The pattern was ingrained. My success was met with dismissal and comparison. Liam's failures were met with rescue and celebration. It was then that I made a crucial professional decision. I would stop sharing my career accomplishments with them entirely. It was simpler, cleaner, and ultimately less painful than dealing with their dismissal. I was building an empire in silence, knowing that the only person who needed to see my worth was myself. The world was rewarding my competence, and that was all the validation I truly needed. My decision to shield my professional life from my parents was the best emotional insurance policy I ever bought. The monthly phone calls became concise reports on my personal life. Did I adopt a dog? Did I try that new restaurant? Anything but work. It was easier to discuss the weather than the multi-million-dollar platforms I was launching. When Apex launched a revolutionary new software platform, a project where my leadership was instrumental, my promotion to Director of Product Development followed naturally. I was 27, the youngest director in the company's history, managing a team of 30 developers and a budget that dwarfed my parents' entire retirement fund. I bought my first condo, a modest one-bedroom unit near the city center that felt like a palace after years of cheap, leaky rentals. It was mine. I tried one last time to share the excitement. During a Sunday phone call, I mentioned the promotion. My mother cut me off mid-sentence, her voice chirpy. "That's nice, dear, but did you hear? Liam is thinking about going back to school, maybe business like you. He's always been so good with people." The rest of the call, predictably, was dedicated to the boundless potential of Liam, the perpetual prospect, and how they were researching scholarships. After hanging up, I deleted all career updates from my private life script. The chapter of chasing their approval was finally closed. The following year, something truly seismic happened. A headhunter approached me, representing Zenith Enterprises, Apex's largest, most aggressive competitor. They offered me a vice president role. When the headhunter mentioned the salary, a number with too many zeros, I choked on my morning coffee. The package included significant equity options, potentially worth millions if the company maintained its trajectory. I was 28, and this wasn't just a job, it was a catapult into the tech stratosphere. After careful consideration and relentless negotiation, I accepted. My new role came with immense pressure, but also the resources and freedom to genuinely innovate. Within 2 years, my division at Zenith developed technologies that positioned the company at the industry's cutting edge. We weren't just competing with Apex anymore, we were setting the pace. My name began appearing, quietly at first, then more prominently in industry journals and tech blogs. I was operating at a level my family couldn't even visualize, yet to them, I was still the single daughter who works too much. Then came the corporate event that changed everything. Zenith merged with global tech giant Nexus Systems, creating Zenith Nexus Dynamics, ZND, one of the largest technology corporations in the world. The board began a secretive, months-long search for a CEO who could integrate two behemoths and navigate the complex, high-stakes political landscape. To my absolute astonishment, I found myself shortlisted alongside seasoned industry veterans who had decades more experience than my entire life. The interview process was brutal. 7 grueling rounds with board members, major investors, and executive teams from both companies. I prepared for weeks, developing a comprehensive, 100-page vision for the merged company's future, addressing everything from technical integration to cultural realignment. I poured every ounce of the resilience, self-reliance, and sheer work ethic my lonely childhood had forced me to develop into that pitch. When the board chairman called me one late night, I was 30 years old, and for the first time in my life, momentarily speechless. They offered me the position of Chief Executive Officer. The salary, bonuses, and stock options were quite literally life-altering. But the most meaningful thing was the massive vote of confidence from people who saw me clearly, who valued my competence, and who were betting their futures on my vision. That evening, alone in the top-floor apartment I could now afford, I let myself cry, not tears of sadness, but of profound, singular triumph. I had done it. I had proven my worth, not to them, but to the world, and more importantly, to myself. I called my parents that weekend. I tried to sound casual. CEO of a whole company, my father, Robert, asked, sounding genuinely confused. Is it a startup or something small? When I explained the size and global scope of ZND, managing over 20,000 employees and operations across 3 continents, there was a long, awkward silence. Finally, my mother, Eleanor, piped up. Well, that sounds awfully demanding, Sarah. Will you have time to date? We heard Liam is finally taking classes to become a real estate agent. He's really finding himself now. The conversation quickly evaporated into Liam's potential and how charismatic he was. It was the final, definitive confirmation I needed. My success would never be celebrated. It would only be met with dismissal or worry about my personal life. I made the conscious decision right then. They would never know the true extent of my position. It was simpler this way. It preserved the peace and protected my energy. I began politely declining invitations for weekend visits, citing work commitments, and our contact dwindled to monthly 5-minute calls scheduled between my actual, demanding, world-shaking meetings. I was building a life that reflected my values, not their shallow expectations, and that life was magnificent. My private life became an expertly managed portfolio, much like the company I ran. There was the public CEO persona, polished, strategic, unstoppable, and the private Sarah, who cultivated a chosen family of friends and respected colleagues. These were the people who celebrated my triumphs without an ounce of resentment, who saw me clearly, and who valued my being not my title. This chosen circle became my emotional anchor, proof that healthy, reciprocal relationships were possible. Meanwhile, the dynamic with my biological family continued its slow, predictable decline. My brother, Liam, continued his meandering path, taking classes here and there, never quite committing to the real estate career my mother had so enthusiastically promoted. He was still living at home, rent-free, his time to find himself stretching into his late 20s. They enabled him, cushioned every fall, and ensured he never had to experience a consequence greater than the disappointment in his parents' eyes, which quickly melted into rescue. My career at Zenith Nexus Dynamics was in hyperdrive. Under my leadership, Z&D wasn't just integrating, it was expanding into new, massive markets across Asia, and we were poised for a massive global stock offering. My days were a blur of jet lag, complex legal negotiations, and high-stakes decision-making. The distance from my family felt not like estrangement, but like necessary decompression. Our monthly 5-minute check-ins were transactional and superficial, a ritualistic obligation I fulfilled more for the sake of checking a box than for connection. I would listen patiently to the updates on Liam's latest venture, now trying to start a drop-shipping business that would inevitably fail, and field Mother Eleanor's endless questions about whether I was too busy to find a nice man. December always brought a unique complication, the annual Albright Christmas party. It was a tradition dating back to my childhood, always held at their suburban house, always a picture-perfect facade of familial bliss. Every year, I drove the 2 hours from my downtown penthouse, walked into the same living room, and dutifully presented expensive, thoughtful gifts that were always received with a polite, immediate placement under the tree, quickly overshadowed by the conversation surrounding Liam's latest girlfriend or career idea. Every year, I endured the uncomfortable, intrusive questions about my single status and my unstable computer job. Last December started the same way. 3 weeks before Christmas, Liam called my parents with exciting news. He was dating someone named Emily. Usually, this wouldn't register as a major event. Liam's relationships typically lasted as long as his job ventures. But this time was different. Emily, according to my mother's breathless phone call to me, was a director at a major tech company. "She's so accomplished, Sarah," my mother gushed, her voice practically vibrating with awe, an awe she had never once reserved for me. "She has her own corner office, and everything. Your father and I are just thrilled for Liam. She might be just what he needs to finally find his path, dear." I was on the phone, balancing it between my ear and shoulder, while simultaneously signing off on quarterly financial projections that would determine the bonuses for 20,000 employees worldwide. I agreed automatically, making appropriate noises of support. "That's great, Mom. I look forward to meeting her at Christmas." The next week was a rush of preparation. I arranged for the minimum 2 days off work I could take without major operational disruptions. I bought the usual expensive gifts, a rare collector's edition of Father Robert's favorite author, a high-end cashmere sweater for Mother Eleanor, and for Liam the latest, most sought-after gaming console he had been vaguely hinting about for months. I booked my flight from New York, where I was closing a deal, back to Chicago, rented a luxury SUV, and braced myself mentally for the inevitable discomfort. Then, one Monday evening, exactly a week before Christmas, the phone rang. It was my father, Robert. His voice was unusually strained and formal. This was the call, the one where he explained they were rescheduling my invitation because Liam's new girlfriend, Emily, needed to feel comfortable. "Laura is apparently very proud of her position," he stammered, using the wrong name, Emily. And, well, we wouldn't want her to feel intimidated, Sarah. You know, with what you do. The nerve of it, the colossal blindness, was staggering. I, the CEO of the company that likely acquired the building where Emily worked, was deemed a threat to her ego and, by extension, to Liam's. My presence, my very being, was an inconvenient truth that had to be physically removed for the comfort of others. That was the moment the final fragile hope of being truly seen by my parents died. The Christmas ban wasn't an isolated incident. It was the final, distilled evidence of their decades of willful ignorance and self-serving bias. I stood in the hushed, panoramic conference room, the city lights of downtown Chicago twinkling far below, holding the phone against my ear. My executive assistant, Chloe, was gesturing urgently behind the glass door, reminding me of the board meeting waiting on my return. The conversation with my father, Robert, felt like a bizarre theatrical performance. "You're uninviting me from Christmas," I stated, my voice dangerously level, masking the cold, volcanic shock spreading through my chest. "Not uninviting, Sarah," he corrected hastily, the lie catching in his throat. "Just rescheduling. We think it might be a bit awkward, with what you do for work and all." He was using my hard-won success as a weapon against my inclusion in my own family's history. I heard Mother Eleanor's muffled, insistent voice in the background, then the shuffle of the phone changing hands. "Sarah, honey," my mother's voice chirped, sickly sweet, the tone she always used right before saying something truly wounding. "We're just trying to make sure Liam has his moment. You know how important this relationship is to him, and we would hate for anything to overshadow that. Emily is the first girl he's dated with a real career, and we want her to feel comfortable with the family." "And my presence," I clarified, the coldness now bone deep, "would make her uncomfortable." "Well, you can be a bit intense about your work, dear," she said, choosing her words with delicate cruelty. "And you know how Liam gets when he feels compared to you. We just want everything to be perfect for him. You understand, right? You can still come for New Year's Day brunch." My mind was already racing ahead, calculating the logistics of damage control. The gifts I'd bought, the flight I'd booked. I found myself agreeing numbly, hanging up with robotic pleasantries, the mechanical efficiency of a CEO taking over for the broken heart of a daughter. I returned to the board meeting, smiling rigidly, guiding a discussion about resource allocation across 3 continents as if my world hadn't just imploded. Only Chloe noticed the tightness around my eyes, silently placing a cup of hot tea at my elbow and preemptively rescheduling my afternoon appointments. That evening, the full, devastating impact hit me. 32 years of striving, of achieving, of constantly proving my worth, and the final verdict was this. I was still the inconvenient daughter, the one whose achievements were threatening rather than celebrated. I was still expected to accommodate Liam's fragile ego, to make myself smaller so he could feel bigger. The Christmas ban wasn't about Emily. It was about protecting the delicate fantasy my parents had built around their golden child. I called my best friend, Zoe, my chosen family. She arrived at my penthouse an hour later, armed with a bottle of expensive Cabernet and unwavering outrage. "They banned you from Christmas because your brother's girlfriend has a mid-level management job," Zoe clarified, her voice shaking with righteous anger. "While you run a global corporation? That is Olympic-level delusion, Sarah. It's clinical." "They don't know what I do," I reminded her, wiping away bitter tears. "I stopped telling them years ago when it became clear they didn't care." "That is not an excuse," Zoe insisted, pouring the wine. "That's the core problem. Normal parents would be throwing parades for what you've accomplished. We talked late into the night. By morning, I had found peace, a grim, final sort of acceptance. I would honor the Christmas ban. They had made their choice, but I certainly wouldn't be attending the consolation prize New Year's brunch. Instead, I booked a solo spa retreat in Aspen, arranging to have the thoughtful, expensive gifts delivered to my parents' house with a simple, polite note. On Christmas Day, I deliberately avoided social media, but eventually curiosity or perhaps masochism got the better of me. My mother had posted several photos. Liam beaming beside a tall, professionally dressed Emily, my parents looking proudly at the camera, the dining table set with the special occasion china and crystal. The caption read, "Perfect Christmas with Liam and his amazing girlfriend, Emily." So proud of these two power players. The absence of any mention of me was both painful and utterly predictable. I closed the app, focused on the deep tissue massage I'd scheduled, and allowed the painful truth to sink in. Some last, fragile hope that they might eventually see me clearly had finally died. In its place was a strange, sad acceptance and the unbreakable resolve to build my life without the validation I had unconsciously been seeking for so long. January and February were a blur of work, a grateful immersion into the demands of ZND that left little room for personal reflection. The company was pushing aggressively into the Asian market, and I spent 3 weeks traveling between Singapore, Seoul, and Tokyo, establishing new offices and navigating complex geopolitical frameworks. The sheer scale of my actual life, the decisions I was making that impacted thousands of people and billions of dollars, made the pettiness of the Christmas ban feel distant, almost unreal. I returned to headquarters in early March and threw myself into the strategic planning cycle. My parents called twice, leaving cheerful, generic voicemails that made absolutely no reference to Christmas, my absence, or the New Year's brunch. It was as if I had merely been busy and the incident had never occurred. I didn't return the calls. Liam sent a generic text on my birthday, "Happy birthday, sis." No response was required or expected. The emotional distance felt oddly liberating, a kind of necessary amputation. Life settled back into a structured, intensely focused routine, challenging work during the week and relaxing weekends filled with my chosen family, fitness classes, and mentorship work with young women in tech. I was building a legacy, a life that finally reflected my own profound sense of worth, entirely separate from my lineage. The quiet calm was shattered on a Tuesday in mid-March. Jennifer Davies, our HR director, requested an urgent, confidential meeting. Jennifer was meticulous and rarely scheduled anything last minute, so I cleared 30 minutes between budget reviews to see her. "We've received an interesting application for the senior product manager position," she began after the standard pleasantries. The position was highly sought after, requiring specific high-level expertise. The candidate has solid qualifications, good references from his last 2 positions, and an interesting note on his application. She slid a printed resume across my massive, polished glass desk. I glanced down, expecting to see a candidate from a competitor firm, and felt the blood drain from my face, a dizzying, cold shock that momentarily silenced the entire world. The name at the top read Liam Albright. "He listed a potential conflict of interest," Jennifer continued, blissfully unaware of the emotional detonation she had just triggered. "It simply reads, family connection to CEO. I wanted to discuss the proper protocol for handling this application immediately." I stared at the resume, my vision blurring, trying to process the seismic shift. Liam, the golden child who struggled to hold down a job at a mall kiosk, had somehow managed to build a resume, 3 companies in the past year, showing progressively more responsibility in product marketing. His educational background listed a recently completed online business certification, but thankfully no fictional college degree. He even claimed proficiency in several software platforms Zandy used. Did he specifically mention me by name? I asked, pushing the words past a sudden lump in my throat, keeping my voice utterly neutral and professional. Jennifer looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting in her leather chair. Not exactly. When I called to schedule his preliminary interview, he asked if there were any fast-track options available for candidates with connections to senior leadership. I explained our standard process, and he mentioned being related to someone in the executive team, but wouldn't specify who. He clearly thought he was playing some kind of internal card. The situation was both a professional dilemma. ZND had strict anti-nepotism policies, though they primarily addressed direct reporting, and a personal grenade. How had Liam found his way to this specific application at my company, let alone the true magnitude of my position? As far as I knew, he believed I was just a mid-level manager somewhere. I needed to act, not react. My professional integrity, the very currency of my career, was on the line. I will need to recuse myself from the initial hiring process, I told Jennifer after a moment of intense consideration. Please conduct the standard screening, technical reviews, and departmental interviews. If he reaches the final round, I will formally disclose the relationship to the board and conduct the executive interview, exactly as I would for any high-level candidate. Our ethics policy, designed for transparency, allowed this. Jennifer nodded, making rapid notes. Should I inform the interview panel about the connection? No, I decided firmly. Judge him solely on his qualifications and his performance in the interviews. Document everything thoroughly. I want this process to be completely fair and defensible. After Jennifer left, I closed my office door. I didn't cry or panic. I simply Googled Liam Albright. His LinkedIn profile showed the same employment history, albeit with descriptions of his responsibilities that were, shall we say, considerably embellished. No mention of me. No family connection. I spent the next week distracted, wondering, when and how was Liam going to discover that the senior leader he was trying to leverage was the actual CEO of the entire corporation? The revelation, I knew, would be explosive. The waiting game was agonizing. It wasn't the suspense of whether Liam would get the job. I was confident the rigorous Z&E process would filter out any unqualified candidate, but the emotional anticipation of the bomb drop. I had carefully controlled my narrative for years, keeping my professional ascent a protective shield. Now Liam, completely unaware, was about to walk into the center of my meticulously constructed world. Jennifer provided updates, weekly, almost daily. To my surprise, Liam was advancing. He had passed the initial phone screening. He completed the first round of interviews with the product team. The feedback was surprisingly positive. He had clearly prepared well, demonstrating not only genuine knowledge of product management principles, likely gleaned from his short-lived attempts in product marketing, but a kind of infectious, if somewhat manufactured, enthusiasm. This created conflicting, deeply uncomfortable emotions. On one hand, a strange, residual big sister pride surfaced. Liam was showing competence. He was making a genuine effort. On the other, the whole scenario raised flaming red flags. Why Z&E? Why this sudden, career-focused ambition? And how much did he really know about my role? The situation demanded more than just HR oversight. I scheduled a confidential meeting with Patricia Gonzalez, our Chief Legal Officer, and our Chief Ethics Officer. I laid out the facts, the history of the severe, documented family favoritism, the banishment from Christmas, and Liam's indirect attempt to leverage a senior executive connection. I was utterly transparent. We need to protect the company's integrity above all, I stressed, and protect myself from any accusation of bias, either for or against him. Patricia, our CLO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, absorbed the information with a slight, knowing nod. The standard process is the best defense, Sarah. However, we can mitigate the appearance of impropriety in the final stage. We can add an additional, independent executive interviewer, someone high-ranking, but completely outside your direct chain of command. That provides an independent assessment and protects both you and the company. I agreed immediately. The integrity of the ZND hiring process was non-negotiable. 2 more weeks passed. Liam continued advancing. The department head who would be his direct supervisor was reportedly impressed with his creative approach to product positioning and his apparent enthusiasm for ZND's mission. I reviewed the interview notes and was genuinely surprised by the thoughtful, articulate responses attributed to my brother. This wasn't the aimless, entitled Liam of the past. Or perhaps it was a Liam I had simply never been allowed to know, hidden beneath layers of parental enabling. The final executive interview was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. I arranged for Diane Reeves, our chief marketing officer, a fiercely intelligent, completely independent board member, to join me. I briefed Diane on the ethics requirement and the family connection, but withheld the personal, painful history. I wanted her assessment to be clinical, objective, and unbiased. My executive assistant, Chloe, who knew more about my family dynamics than anyone at ZND, gave me a deep, sympathetic look when confirming the appointment. "Would you like me to stay late in case you need anything after?" she offered. I smiled, gratefully, but declined. "Whatever happens, Chloe, this is something I need to process alone." The night before the interview, I barely slept. I rehearsed professional questions, prepared for every possible scenario. Would Liam be angry? Embarrassed? Would he try to leverage our relationship immediately? Or would he simply withdraw his application the moment he saw me? By morning, I was exhausted but focused, resolved to handle the situation with the same professionalism I brought to every high-stakes negotiation. Friday afternoon arrived with a tense, unsettling speed. From my 22nd floor office window, overlooking the bustling city, I watched Liam enter the building at 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes early for his 2 o'clock interview. Even from 20 stories up, I recognized his walk, the same confident swagger he had developed in high school, perhaps a little more refined. He wore a brand-new suit, charcoal gray and well-tailored, clearly an investment he'd made for this occasion. Surveillance cameras tracked his progress through security, the visitor badge check-in, and his escort to the preliminary interview floor. I received text updates from the department heads. Conversations going well. Asking intelligent questions about team structure. He seemed genuinely excited. At 3:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with Chloe's final update. Final interview in executive boardroom in 15 minutes. CMO already there. I gathered my notes, adjusted my blazer, and took the private elevator up to the 22nd floor. The air felt charged, heavy with the weight of our shared, unspoken history. The reckoning was about to begin. Diane Reeves, our chief marketing officer, was already reviewing Liam's resume in the expansive, glass-walled boardroom when I entered. The room was designed for power and transparency, with a massive table reflecting the cityscape. I positioned myself at the head of the table, my back to the panoramic windows, allowing the late afternoon sun to silhouette my form, making me an imposing figure against the skyline. "His background is certainly non-traditional," Diane commented, tapping the paper. "But his ideas about our consumer electronics vertical are surprisingly innovative. I'm curious to see how he handles the strategic questions." I nodded, taking my seat. "We'll ensure the process is rigorous, Diane." At precisely 3:45 p.m., the heavy mahogany door opened. Jennifer, our HR director, entered first, followed by Liam. His expression, as he strode confidently into the room, was almost cocky, the familiar Liam swagger, slightly polished by the expensive suit. But that confidence instantly evaporated the moment his eyes locked onto mine. The transformation was dramatic. His face cycled rapidly through confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally a dawning, sickening horror. He stopped mid-stride, his mouth actually dropping open. "Sarah!" he blurted out, the professional composure he had clearly practiced for weeks crumbling into dust. "What are you doing here?" I maintained a neutral, professional mask, my expression utterly devoid of sibling recognition or warmth. "Good afternoon, Mr. Albright," I stated calmly, my voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "I am Sarah Albright, CEO of Zenith Nexus Dynamics. Please have a seat." Jennifer, the consummate professional, betrayed no surprise at the revelation. She simply gestured to the chair across from me and quietly excused herself, closing the door softly behind her. Liam remained frozen for a few seconds, his eyes darting wildly around the room, taking in the opulent executive trappings, the pristine leather chairs, the subtle Z&D branding, the sheer, breathtaking scale of the city view beyond the windows. He slowly moved to the indicated chair, pulling it out with a clatter. "You're the CEO," he repeated slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Of this entire company?" "Yes," I confirmed, then gestured to Diane. "This is Diane Reeves, our Chief Marketing Officer. She will be joining us for this interview." Diane extended her hand across the table, which Liam shook automatically, his eyes never leaving my face. The sheer shock of the discovery had rendered him temporarily speechless. "I don't understand," he managed, his voice strained. "How long have you? Why did you never—" "Mr. Albright," I interrupted, gently but firmly redirecting the focus. "We have 45 minutes scheduled to discuss your qualifications for the senior product manager position. Would you prefer to proceed, or would you like to reschedule?" That professional framing seemed to snap him back to the devastating reality of the situation. He straightened in his chair, adjusted his tie, a nervous tick, and attempted to recover his composure. "Of course. Let us proceed," he said, his voice only slightly strained. I apologize for my surprise. I was not expecting to see my sister today. For transparency, I addressed Diane, maintaining eye contact. As you can see, Mr. Albright is my brother. I recused myself from the earlier stages of the interview process to avoid any conflict of interest. However, company policy requires CEO approval for all senior management positions. Diane nodded crisply. "Thank you for clarifying. Mr. Albright, shall we begin with your interest in this position?" The interview proceeded with a surface level of professionalism, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. Liam attempted to answer the technical questions competently, but his earlier confidence had utterly evaporated, replaced by palpable fear. Twice, he tried to reference our relationship indirectly, as someone who has grown up understanding leadership. and each time I redirected him immediately back to specific questions about product life cycle management or cross-functional team coordination. His answers became increasingly scattered as the interview progressed. When we reached the case study portion, requiring a complex analysis of a hypothetical product launch scenario, Liam struggled visibly. The thoughtful approach reportedly shown in earlier rounds was replaced by vague generalities, buzzwords, and nervous glances in my direction. The shock of my position had completely derailed his preparation. After 45 minutes, Diane wrapped up her questions and excused herself, explaining she had another commitment. As the door closed behind her, Liam's professional facade crumbled entirely. The executive boardroom, the silent witness to my triumph, was now the site of his ultimate humiliation. The true confrontation was about to begin. As the heavy door clicked shut behind Diane, the formal atmosphere of the boardroom dissolved into the raw, uncomfortable silence of family history. Liam lunged forward in his chair, his eyes blazing with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. "What the hell, Sarah?" he hissed, his voice low and ragged. "You're the CEO of a major corporation, and you never thought to mention it? To your own family?" I remained seated, maintaining the physical and emotional high ground, my composure unshakable. "Would that have mattered, Liam?" I asked quietly, the question cutting deeper than any accusation. "When have you or our parents ever shown genuine, sustained interest in my career that wasn't immediately redirected or dismissed?" "That's not fair," he protested, running a hand through his hair. "We always knew you were doing well in tech or whatever. But CEO? That's a whole different level. Wait until Mom and Dad find out." His thinly veiled threat that the revelation of my success would now somehow become my fault only confirmed my initial decision to keep my life private. "They've known about the whatever for years, Liam." I stopped volunteering information because no one was interested in hearing it. I leaned forward slightly, shifting the focus back to the immediate professional issue. "Liam, I need to ask you two things, and I want an honest answer. Why did you apply for this specific company, and how much did you know about my position here?" He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, glancing away at the cityscape. "I knew you worked for Zenith Nexus Dynamics. Emily mentioned it once." The pieces, which had been rattling around in my mind for weeks, finally clicked into place with a sharp, cold finality. "Emily, your Christmas girlfriend. She worked here." Liam shifted uncomfortably in the expensive chair. "She was in the marketing department for about 6 months last year. Got fired in November for some ethics thing, misappropriation of funds, I think. She was pretty bitter about it. Said the leadership was toxic." He made air quotes around the word toxic. "When she met me and realized my last name, she put it together that we might be related. She thought it was hilarious that I had no idea what you really did." The revelation stung more than I cared to admit. Liam's application wasn't the result of self-discovery or a deep career change. It was opportunistic, influenced by a scorned ex-employee looking to potentially leverage a perceived family tie. "So you applied here because—" He shrugged, some of his old, familiar bravado returning. "Why not? I'm qualified. The position matches my experience. And yeah, I thought maybe having a connection wouldn't hurt. I didn't know you were the actual CEO, though. I figured maybe a department head or something." The weight of decades of miscommunication and willful ignorance hung heavy in the air between us. "What happens now?" Liam finally asked, his voice low, filled with a raw, almost childlike uncertainty. "With the job, I mean." "The same thing that would happen with any candidate, Liam," I replied evenly. HR will collect feedback from all interviewers, including mine, and make a determination based solely on your qualifications and fit. I will not be the sole decision maker. But you could put in a good word, he pressed, the entitlement creeping back into his voice. Come on, Sarah. We're family. Which is exactly why I need to be especially careful about showing no favoritism, I explained, repeating the mantra I had prepared. The process will be fair. That is all I can promise. He stood up abruptly, frustration evident in the tight line of his jaw. Unbelievable. All these years you've been holding out on us, playing some weird game, and now you can't even help your own brother. I remained seated. I haven't been playing games, Liam. I have been building a career while being consistently dismissed by my family. I stopped sharing because no one was interested. Well, we're interested now, he said with a harsh, brittle laugh. Wait until Mom and Dad find out. They are going to flip. His thinly veiled threat of family chaos hung in the air. I simply nodded, formally extending my hand to signal the absolute end of the conversation. Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Albright. HR will be in touch regarding next steps. He stared at my outstretched hand for a long moment before giving it a brief, almost pained shake. At the door, he paused and turned back, his expression finally showing a flicker of genuine vulnerability beneath the anger. For what it's worth, he said, his voice softer, some of us were actually trying to make something of ourselves, too. Not all of us had your brains, or your whatever it is that makes you so perfect at everything. Before I could process the sudden, complex injection of self-pity and resentment, he was gone. I returned to my private office, closed the door, and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to process the emotional devastation before calling Jennifer, instructing her to treat Liam's application with zero special treatment in either direction. The company would make its decision based solely on merit. The storm I had held off for years had finally broken, and I was bracing for the inevitable, catastrophic fallout. The fallout was swifter and more theatrical than I had anticipated. The storm broke less than 24 hours later, early on Saturday morning. My cell phone exploded with notifications. 6 missed calls from Mother Eleanor, from Father Robert, and a series of increasingly dramatic text messages. Liam told us everything. Call us immediately. How could you keep this from your family? This is serious. Call us now. I silenced my phone and went for a long, deliberate run along the lakefront, giving myself the necessary physical and mental space to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. When I returned to my penthouse apartment, a space occupying the top half of one of the city's most exclusive residential high-rises, I was calm and utterly resolved. I was just considering returning their calls when the building's security desk phoned up. Miss Albright, there are 2 individuals in the lobby claiming to be your parents, Mr. and Mrs. Albright. They are quite insistent about seeing you. Should I send them up? I closed my eyes briefly, sighing at the sheer predictability of their disregard for boundaries. Yes, please escort them up, thank you. I tidied the already immaculate living room, a space professionally decorated in minimalist, modern tones designed to emphasize the breathtaking panoramic city view. The elevator announced their arrival with a soft chime. I opened the door to find my parents standing there, looking simultaneously angry and bewildered. My mother's eyes immediately began cataloging the space, the expensive furnishings, the abstract art on the walls, the sheer scale of the apartment. My father seemed fixated on the view beyond the windows, mentally calculating property values, no doubt. You might have told us you moved, Mother Eleanor said, bypassing any form of greeting. We had to Google you to find this address. Please come in. I replied, stepping aside. Would you like some coffee? They entered cautiously, as though stepping into a foreign embassy. My mother perched stiffly on the edge of the white leather sofa. My father wandered straight to the windows, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the vast city spread below. Nice place, he commented, his tone immediately moving from judgment to implied demand. Must have cost a fortune. I ignored the implication, serving coffee in handcrafted ceramic mugs before taking a seat opposite my mother. I assume Liam told you about the job interview. He told us a lot more than that, my mother said, her voice wounded and dramatic. He told us you are the CEO of a major corporation, that you've been hiding your success from us for years, that you deliberately kept us in the dark about your life. I didn't hide anything, I corrected calmly. I simply stopped volunteering information that was consistently met with disinterest. Disinterest! My father spun around from the window, indignation coloring his face. We are your parents. Of course, we are interested in your life. Are you? I asked quietly, letting the question hang heavy in the air. When was the last time either of you asked me a genuine question about my work, my achievements, or my challenges? They exchanged uncomfortable, guilty glances. We always knew you were doing well, my mother said defensively. You were always so independent, so capable. We didn't think you needed our involvement. Not needing involvement is different from not wanting acknowledgement, I pointed out. Every major milestone in my career was either dismissed or immediately redirected to concerns about my dating life, or worse, comparisons to Liam's potential. The Christmas party was the final straw. You uninvited me because you were worried I might overshadow a mid-level manager. How would you have reacted if you had known I was actually the CEO? My mother had the grace to flush slightly, shifting on the sofa. That was a misunderstanding, Sarah. We just wanted Liam to have his moment. Liam has had all the moments, I replied, maintaining my steady, level voice. Every moment for as long as I can remember. My achievements have been footnotes at best in our family story. And now you're here. An uncomfortable silence descended. My father finally sighed heavily, moving to sit beside my mother, the financial calculation suddenly overriding the need for defense. Well, my mother finally said with forced brightness, the important thing is that we know now, and we are very, very proud, extremely proud. Our daughter, a CEO. It's remarkable, truly impressive. You must be doing quite well financially, my father agreed, his tone shifting to something calculating, setting off immediate warning bells. Liam mentioned you live in the penthouse. This entire half-floor, I corrected neutrally. I waited, saying nothing. My father cleared his throat, getting to the real motive. Speaking of Liam, we were hoping you might reconsider his application. He really needs this opportunity, Sarah. Things have been tough for him lately, especially since he and Emily broke up a few weeks ago. I see, I said, suppressing a grim smile. The pieces fell into place. Emily, fired for ethics issues, had leveraged Liam's name, warned the parents about him after the breakup, and now the parents were attempting to leverage my name. I cannot and will not discuss Liam's application. Our HR department handles all hiring decisions strictly according to company policy. But surely you have some influence, my mother pressed, desperate now. He is your brother. Which is exactly why I need to be especially careful about showing no favoritism, I repeated for the final time. My father shifted tactics, leaning in conspiratorially, his voice low. Sarah, we need to be honest with you about something. Your mother and I are in a bit of financial difficulty. The house needs major repairs. Property taxes have gone up significantly, and we had to take out a second mortgage last year to help Liam with some expenses. The naked entitlement of the statement was breathtaking. After decades of emotional abandonment and favoritism, they now felt entitled to my financial rescue based solely on a biological connection. I see, I said, rising from my chair. I need to step out for a moment. I have an important call to make. Please excuse me. I walked to my home office and closed the door, leaving them to exchange agitated whispers in the living room. They almost certainly assumed I was calling my financial advisor or bank to arrange a transfer. I was making a very different kind of call. I remained in my home office for 10 minutes, allowing my parents, Robert and Eleanor, to stew in the assumption that I was arranging their financial rescue. I wasn't. I was calling Dr. Eleanor Hayes, one of the most respected family therapists in downtown Chicago, a woman known for her work with complex, high-conflict family dynamics. Dr. Hayes, recognizing the unique nature of my request, agreed to see us for an emergency initial consultation that very afternoon. When I returned to the living room, my parents were examining the cityscape, their eyes gleaming with the predatory excitement of property valuation. "Have you made arrangements, Sarah?" my mother asked eagerly, barely concealing her impatience. "Yes," I replied, resuming my seat, "but probably not the kind you were expecting. I have just spoken with Dr. Eleanor Hayes." "Eleanor?" My parents exchanged confused, worried glances. "A therapist," my father repeated, his tone instantly defensive. "We don't need therapy, Sarah. We need financial assistance. We're not mentally ill." I finished for him. Yes, that was clear. But I am not offering money right now. I'm offering something much more valuable, an opportunity to rebuild our relationship on healthier, more honest terms. My mother's face tightened with disbelief. "Sarah, this is ridiculous. We just need some help with expenses. Therapy is not appropriate." "Therapy isn't solely for mental illness, Mother," I corrected gently. "It is for improving communication, understanding patterns of behavior, and creating healthier dynamics. Our family has 32 years of fundamentally dysfunctional patterns to address. I believe that is a worthy investment." "This is emotional blackmail," my father sputtered, his face flushing with indignation. "After everything we've done for you." "That is exactly the kind of statement we need to examine, Father," I interrupted, cutting him off cleanly. "What exactly do you believe you have done for me that entitles you to my financial support now, especially after decades of favoring Liam and dismissing my achievements? I paid my own way through school. I paid off my own debts. Your investment was purely emotional, and the returns for me were negative." The directness of the question, the cold, irrefutable logic, left them momentarily stunned. "Here is my offer," I continued, establishing the boundary with absolute clarity. "I will pay for 6 months of weekly family therapy sessions for all 4 of us, including Liam, assuming he is willing. The commitment must be full and honest participation. If, at the end of that 6 months, we have established a genuinely healthier, respectful relationship, then I will consider helping with specific, documented financial needs. Not open-ended support and not emotional blackmail. I will not be manipulated or guilted into financial support without addressing the underlying emotional issues." My father narrowed his eyes, searching for a loophole. "And if we refuse this therapy?" "Then nothing changes," I replied simply, meeting his gaze directly. I continue my life as I have been. You continue yours. We maintain the distant, transactional relationship we have had for years, and your financial burdens remain yours alone. The choice is yours, a path to genuine connection or the status quo. My parents conferred in hushed, agitated whispers. They were trapped. They desperately needed the financial safety net, and my insistence on therapy was the only key. They were forced to choose between their pride and their security. The silence was thick with resentment, but also with calculation. Finally, my father turned back to me, the defeat visible in his shoulders. And you would pay for these sessions? Every one, I confirmed. Dr. Hayes is expecting us at 4 o'clock today for an initial consultation. Liam has already been messaged. The decision is yours. To my surprise, they agreed, though with obvious reluctance and anger still simmering beneath the surface. It was a victory, but a fragile one, the beginning of a long, painful, and necessary road toward true, humanistic healing. I knew this was the only way to save not just my boundaries, but perhaps the remaining years of our family's future. The first few therapy sessions with Dr. Eleanor Hayes were predictably agonizing. The atmosphere in the neutral, elegantly furnished office was thick with decades of unspoken resentment and defensiveness. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, were initially resistant, viewing the entire process as an unnecessary formality demanded by their wealthy daughter. My father resisted attending at all, only coming when pressured by my mother, and even then he participated minimally, crossing his arms and sighing dramatically. My mother oscillated between tearful, defensive justifications of her parenting. We just wanted Liam to be confident, and fleeting, shallow moments of remorse that felt more performative than genuine. Liam's presence was the most volatile element. He was sullen, resentful of the forced confrontation, and initially focused only on my betrayal, how I had held out on the family. We spent weeks untangling the complex web of financial expectations, the entitlement fostered in Liam, and the deeply ingrained culture of dismissal toward me. Dr. Hayes, a serene and sharp woman in her 50s, was masterful at creating a safe space where each of us could speak without interruption. She meticulously guided us to identify the deep-seated patterns that had defined our relationships, the codependence built through Liam's rescue, and the emotional abandonment disguised as fostering my independence. The breakthrough, the moment that shifted my perspective entirely, occurred near the end of the 4th session. Dr. Hayes asked a simple, profound question. Liam, I want you to name one thing you wish your family, especially your sister, understood about you and your experience growing up. Liam, who had spent the last 3 sessions staring at the floor, looked up slowly. His eyes were red, but for the first time they held genuine pain, not just resentment. I wish they understood, he said, his voice quiet and shaky, that being the favorite is its own kind of prison. The room went silent. My mother gasped softly. Liam continued, not meeting anyone's eyes. Everyone expects you to be special, to succeed effortlessly, but no one ever shows you how. They just keep making excuses when you fail, and it makes every small failure huge, because you can't blame anyone but yourself. I never got to figure out who I was without them watching. Sarah got to fail and rise on her own. I had to live up to a gold standard that wasn't real. In that moment, I saw my brother clearly, perhaps for the first time in 30 years. The golden child status that I had bitterly envied, the cushion of protection and unconditional praise, had its own damaging, crippling effects. While the neglect had forced me to develop ironclad independence and resilience, The enabling had stunted Liam's ability to develop self-efficacy and face real-world consequences. My father, who had been silently resistant, finally lowered his gaze. "We thought we were doing the right thing for our son," he mumbled, a flicker of genuine regret crossing his face. The therapy process became difficult in a different way after that, less about accusation and more about painful, genuine introspection. My parents began to slowly acknowledge their favoritism, though they struggled to recognize its full, long-term impact on both of us. Liam and I began having tentative, cautious conversations outside of the sessions, slowly building a sibling relationship that had never really existed. We talked about industry trends, professional growth, and even sometimes the sheer awkwardness of growing up Albright. At ZND, the hiring process ran its course. Liam's application was, as expected, not selected for the senior product manager position. However, the feedback provided by the HR and marketing teams was genuinely positive about his core skills. This structured feedback, divorced from family drama, helped him secure a role at a smaller, mid-level technology company in the user experience sector, an area where his natural charisma and empathy, once viewed as just being good with people, could genuinely shine. As the 6-month mark approached, the fragile foundations of a healthier family were being laid. We still had moments of falling into old patterns, my mother making a backhanded comment, my father shutting down, but now we had the tools to recognize and address them. The true test, however, lay ahead. Would they continue to value healing over the prospect of my money? The 6-month mark arrived more quickly than I expected. We had made measurable, undeniable progress. My parents were attending sessions willingly, albeit still awkwardly, and had begun asking me genuine questions about my work, not my dating life, making small, consistent efforts to show interest without any ulterior motive. Liam and I had established a tentative but warm friendship, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss his new role in UX design, an area where he was genuinely thriving, finally free from the expectation of the Albright career track. The ultimate measure of success, however, was not emotional but financial, the very thing that had brought them to my doorstep. My parents had independently begun to address their financial issues. Using a financial advisor I had recommended but not funded, they made the mature, difficult decision to sell the large, suburban house, the shrine to the golden child fantasy, and downsize to a smaller, more manageable home in a quieter neighborhood. This reduced their mortgage, eliminated the crippling second mortgage, and significantly lowered their property tax burden. They had, finally, taken responsibility for their own financial health. In our final scheduled session, Dr. Hayes asked if we wished to continue therapy. The unanimous decision to proceed, voluntarily and on our own terms, was the strongest evidence of how far we had come. The relationship was still fragile, still a work in progress, but it was honest. The following Christmas looked completely different from the one that had started this journey. We gathered at a neutral location, a private dining room at a nondescript downtown restaurant. There were no banned family members, no false pretenses, and no hidden agendas. The gifts were small and heartfelt, no longer expensive tokens meant to buy acceptance. The conversation was sometimes stilted, occasionally uncomfortable, but fundamentally honest. My parents made a genuine effort to inquire about my work, not just the size of the company, but the ethical challenges of running a global operation. They allowed Liam to speak about his new job without immediately attempting to inflate his position. My professional life at Zenith Nexus Dynamics continued to thrive. My leadership was recognized with industry awards, acknowledgments that felt meaningful but no longer essential to my core sense of self-worth. The most profound change, however, was internal. I no longer measured my value through my family's recognition or lack thereof. I had learned to accept their limitations. They were never going to be the ideal, unconditionally supportive parents I had always longed for, but I could appreciate their genuine efforts toward change. They, in turn, had learned that family relationships, especially with an independent daughter, required boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect to be healthy. Liam found his path, one suited to his actual talents, rather than our parents' expectations. We became friendly industry colleagues, occasionally consulting on projects or referring opportunities to each other. He was building his own self-worth, brick by painful brick. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, never fully grasped the depth of their favoritism or its psychological impact, but they made consistent, conscious efforts to distribute their attention and affection more equitably. They began celebrating my accomplishments, albeit sometimes awkwardly, and they allowed Liam to experience natural consequences rather than constant rescue. For older adults, changing a lifetime of deeply ingrained parenting patterns is an immense task, and I saw their efforts, their genuine, sustained struggle, as a tremendous victory. They found a quiet, dignified happiness in their downsized home, finally free from the financial pressure of maintaining an image for the sake of their son. The truth I discovered through this painful process was simple and profound, and it is the lesson I offer to you. Self-worth cannot be outsourced. It cannot come from external validation, especially from those unwilling or unable to provide it. Real healing begins with accepting people, including your own parents, for who they actually are, not who you need them to be, and then making conscious choices about the role they play in your life. I no longer needed my parents to see my value in order to know my own. I no longer needed Liam to fail in order to feel successful. I had found the peace that comes from setting an unshakable boundary, not built from anger or revenge, but from self-respect and the fierce commitment to my own well-being. And in setting that boundary, paradoxically, I opened the only door that could ever lead to genuine, if imperfect, family healing. If my story resonates with you, I would genuinely love to know, have you ever had to establish a non-negotiable boundary with a parent or sibling to protect your own self-worth? And how did that decision change your relationship dynamic? Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that sometimes the greatest act of love for your family is demanding respect from them.